Welcome to this live, which I have been very excited to do, called Avoidant Abuse. Truth be told, I was going to come on here and talk about breakup recovery tips, and frankly, I just thought, you know what, I'm tired of talking about that, and I want to talk about something that I feel passionate about. So we're going to go through some of the highlights that I took from this book, Avoidant Abuse by Ria Khan, and take the opportunity to describe what this actually is as per what this book describes, and I'll bleed in my own 2 cents into this too. Now, before I jump in and talk about this, I just also want to make this a little announcement to say, as of today, actually it was a few days ago, my team and I launched our new mini course, which is called Blindsided to Breakthrough, First Steps to Healing from an avoidant breakup. And it's designed for those of you that have probably just gone through a sudden breakup and you're in that first stage of trying to figure out what the hell just happened, how can I recover from this, I'm in so much pain and I want support for this. That course is for you. And it's currently at 150 Australian dollars. It will go up next year because at the moment it's a beta test and we're really looking to get feedback for how to improve this. So if you're open to taking this course and helping us out, that'd be awesome. Ideally, it'd be better if you're someone who's, undergoing breakup recovery. But with that all being said, I'll round that piece out by saying if you're interested in participating, please feel free to click the link in my stories and you can go from there and purchase your course and go from there. All right. Let's get into what I have been dying to talk about for a while, which is avoidant abuse. There'll be Q&A with this, so feel free to throw your questions in the question mark box below. I'm going to turn the fan on so that way I don't start singing It's Getting Hot in Here, because I do not have the bandwidth to take off all my clothes. I want to start this out by saying I never really thought about the concept of something called avoidant abuse before reading this particular book. This book was recommended by a subscriber on YouTube, and the book itself is a very hard to find book in that it's an ebook and it came out back in 2015, which goes to show this is obviously something that's been plaguing people for quite some time and isn't something that's new to 2024. Now, the author themselves, I believe, is a clinician, but I have not seen any evidence to suggest definitively that they are, but they speak like one. When I refer to this book, I'm going to share my own thoughts and feelings with regards to what comes out of it because I really like it, but I just want to make a disclaimer and say I do think there are some limitations to this material in that obviously we don't have, from what I can see, a clear evidence of an author who's actually written this, in that we don't know what their credentials are. We don't know definitively if they are a clinician. I've tried looking them up online, can't find them. But I will say the reason I like this book is because one thing that I think really helps survivors of these experiences is having language to define what they've been through. And I've been using some terms like withdrawing and banishment lately, which this book uses to describe avoidant abuse, because it is different from something like narcissistic abuse, where we talk about things like supply, grandiosity, entitlement, narcissistic rage. And this book does a really good job of saying at certain points that we need to be mindful of not necessarily relying on a pathology. Let's focus instead on the behavior, because at the end of the day, the behavior is much more easily quantifiable than looking at whether this person has a mental health disorder. So that can also be present, but it's not always the case. And there's wonderful points about the intentionality of this too. So some of the excerpts that I'm going to read out from this book may be a little bit repetitive from time to time, but it's my hope that as we do this little book club together, if you will, that this will be, a benefit to you. Now, if you're interested in purchasing this book, you can find it by typing in Avoidant Abuse by Ria Khan on Google and get it there, because you can't find it on Amazon. Personally, I have found emailing it to my Kindle was the way to go, because I was just not interested in printing it out as a separate document or reading it on a laptop. But anyways, with those little pedantics out of the way, let's get into the highlights from this book. And there's a few of them, so I may talk for quite a while, but feel free to throw your questions in and I might get round to them as I'm chatting. So let's start the show. So before we get started, let's talk about what avoidant abuse is as per this book. Avoidant abuse is different from a lot of other forms of abuse in that it's defined as covert violence or covert intimate partner violence. Unlike traditional forms of domestic violence, which are, say, physical abuse, things where there's lots of, isolation tactics and there's someone who is being overbearing and smothering, it's the complete opposite. It's when an individual does things to another person to remove themselves from the relationship and to try and make the other person as distant from them emotionally as possible. It's where an individual engages in lots of hot and cold behavior, where the individual might also target someone, yes, I use that word, to try and feel better about themselves. You could have someone who has terrible shame, low self-esteem. They date someone similar to how a narcissist would, dating an empath who has these great qualities, and the person who's committing the avoidant abuse may be doing so because they have a lot of resentment over the fact that the person they're dating has a lot of these great virtuous qualities, and they're projecting a lot of their shame and want to destroy that individual. Sounds a little bit malicious, but in some cases I definitely think it could go there, because we have to remember attachment issues can also border in to Machiavellianism, narcissism, all those wonderful dark triad types. So that can exist. On the flip side, if we go to the more unintentional people who are out there, it may just be a case that these individuals, due to trauma, are intentionally distancing themselves from people because that's how they manage closeness. Anytime they get close, they have to banish their partner or push them away because they can't handle that intense intimacy. Another thing that also comes up with avoidant abuse is this concept of how a lot of these individuals struggle with dealing with reality. They really struggle with the truth. And so a lot of you will be very familiar that when you try and bring up anything to try and bring accountability or a sense of responsibility to someone with a severe avoidant attachment style, there is a tendency for them to not want to sit with that because it provokes shame and they don't want to deal with that. So there's a tendency for them to project. And it's very common for a lot of these individuals to want to out-rationalize reality to make them feel more at ease. This book talks a lot about how these individuals do engage in a lot of rationalizing and fiction and magical thinking to try and get away from the realities of what they've done. So there are many cases where I'm sure you've experienced where avoidants have said absolute whack shit to you, only to then later admit, yeah, I was just scared of actually being honest with you about my feelings. And that was something that I explored in a letter reading earlier in the week as well too. So anyways, with that premise set, I also want to finish the premise off by saying this book talks about how avoidant abuse is typically conducted by those with an avoidant attachment style, not those with avoidant personality disorder, those who have a fear of intimacy and who are looking to control the intimacy between them and the partner that they're with. So, with that being said, this is pretty much what we're dealing with. That's my little synopsis, and now I'm going to go into the deep stuff. I can see someone here has asked, how normal is it that avoidance says that all their partner's life is a lie and then disappear? I'm assuming that means how normal is it for them to say that their exes, had fictitious lives and then they disappeared? I mean, to be honest, it depends from avoidant to avoidant. We know a lot of them aren't very clear about their exes and talk very openly about their past. There can be a lot of rewriting of reality. Dismissive avoidance will often tell you how rosy their childhood was, even though it was trickling with trauma. And fearful avoidance may have a tendency to trauma dump and also have a lot of color and flavor to their past, saying this person was abusive, that person was wild and chaotic, without actually taking into consideration their own involvement. So it depends from person to person. But I should say, all insecure attachment groups have a tendency to also overplay, downplay, and maybe not accurately represent their past as well too. All right, let's get into this. So let's go to the first highlight I had from this book. I'm just hoping my phone, yep, okay, perfect. So, the first particular piece that I highlighted was, during avoidant abuse, the basic grief of loss can combine with the toxic effects of the abuse. The author writes, in many cases, the target can be unaware that they are definitively being abused. I would agree. Some can experience immense confusion which remains unresolved and may only be able to vaguely term their trauma as an inability to reach closure. Along with a deep sense of powerlessness at being the target of abuse, complex and conflicting feelings can arise, including a need to win back the approval or respect of the abuser, combined with an urge to identify with all the powerful perpetrator and a desire to become like them. Some recipients may describe their experience as feeling as if they are being mistreated or even punished and desperate to understand why they are being treated this way. Does that sound familiar to anyone? So, it's very common in this particular space that we see a lot of people who have gone through avoidant abuse to be beyond anything confused as hell as to why they're being subjected to this treatment. And many of you, let's be honest, because we know that predatory coaches prey on a lot of individuals post-avoidant breakup, have a tendency to be very easily, preyed upon by coaches who are doing the whole, let's get your ex back, because many of you have suffered a lack of closure. One of the things I really hate about online influencers when they say things like, you don't need closure to move on. In this instance, I've got to be honest, you do. I think that one of the things that I hate about avoidant abuse and the common rhetoric we hear about not needing closure is that in our experience with being with an avoidant attacher who is severe, who isn't giving you proper answers to an experience, is you've been misled, you've been lied to, you haven't actually got all the facts as to why this relationship or situationship is ending. Much of the time, you're both, you and the avoidant, are still in love with one another, even if the avoidant acts like they're not. And so you've ended a relationship, situationship, while there's still so many question marks about what is, what could be, why we're suddenly ending this over trivial nonsense. And so many people are deprived of necessary information. And one thing this book does later, which we'll go into detail, is how your search for answers is very important as part of your recovery journey, which is why I think a lot of people, when they actually get psychoeducated on avoidant attachers and their behavior, often feel a sense of relief because they're like, oh, that's what it was. That's explaining why I went through that experience. So yeah, I think that when you are in a position to understand the why, it does help. But one thing that avoidance can do, which is bloody painful for a lot of you, and I'm sure a lot of you have experienced this, is they tend not to want to have that closure conversation, and they withdraw and hold that away from you as well too. All right, let's go to another highlight that I've got here. Okay. So another highlight that I've got here is, we live in a culture where rather than remembering and honoring and acknowledging the value for the brief and precious presence of the ephemeral experiences that were shared, we're in a culture of disposability, of devaluing preceding discard, which is a common practice in these experiences. For example, while the right to remain privacy should be protected, it should not come at the cost of providing necessary or important information to the person that need this. Or the right to exit and terminate a relationship, while crucial, must exist alongside the duty to conduct it with value, respect, and honor, rather than to devalue and discard. I love this point so much because one of the things that I really despise about avoidant abuse is when a lot of these avoidant attachers will say, you need to respect my boundaries, which aren't real boundaries at all. It's walls and manipulation. Let's just paint a picture. Let's just imagine that James has been dating Jack. James has abruptly ended things with Jack, citing that, yeah, we're just incompatible, even though they'd been dating for like 5 years and everything felt great up until the point where they went on holidays together, right? And Jack is understandably concerned and is just like, I'm sorry, I don't understand why this is the case, like what's happening. And James says, well, we can still be friends. Let's just not, go out with anyone new. Let's just still be friends. Then James, against his word, goes out and starts dating with a bunch of people. And Jack's like, I'm sorry, I'm confused. I thought we said we were going to be friends. And then James attacks Jack by saying, you're being too needy. I don't have to tell you anything. I'm not responsible for your emotions. You need to go figure this out for yourself. That is a really great example of where, in this case, James is withholding, a lot of critical information, is also trying to have his cake and eat it too, and is also not divulging necessary information to this relationship. He is acting like it's a breach of privacy when it's actually a breach of trust. And even though in this day and age we absolutely should be mindful of protecting privacy, there is a tendency for people who are avoidantly attached to go overboard and not let anyone in, particularly when it's pertinent information that could detrimentally impact the relationship and its health. And I wanted to bring this up from this book because what I love about what it demonstrates too is how there is a tendency for a lot of avoidant abusers to weaponize privacy as a way of not having to be honest with their actions to their partners. All right, let's keep moving on. I apologize that as I keep going through, this is a little bit slow because there were a lot of highlights and my my Kindle is just loading a little bit slowly with this too. All right, so let's see what we got here. Okay. One of the consequences of avoidant abuse is that the avoidants get everything their way while denying their partner everything. Unlike those suffering from bereavement or from more overt forms of abuse that we discussed earlier, they can receive a lot of sympathy and support. The pain of abandonment can largely be disenfranchised grief. So what the author is talking about here is how usually people who've gone through overt forms of violence, domestic abuse that's physical, where there's been a lot of, narcissistic violence, etc., like all that sort of stuff, where it's obvious, it's, clear as day, right? It's often the scene where we see a lot of people get a lot of support for what they've been through, whereas those that have been through avoidant abuse, and I think a lot of you will corroborate this, meaning you'll definitely feel like this relates, is a lot of you guys don't get any justice for what you've been through. Oh, you've been suddenly broken up with by an ex? Just get over it. Just move on. You've had an issue with like a partner and it just seems like, this was something where it was just an easy problem and they were trying to spare you the pain of continuing to be with you. They did you a favor by telling you that you're, a great person, you'll find someone better, right? It's very common for people who've never been through this to not really empathize or give people the support they're looking for. And you often can feel even more traumatized, abandoned, and also hurt off the back of these experiences because you believe that what you've gone through is just somehow, it's just nothing. Like, why are you having such a big reaction to this experience? You just need to grow up and get over it. When in fact, this can only cause you to feel even more crazy, more pain, and really cause you to suffer as a consequence. So one of the things that I find really painful about this is that it's an invisible form of abuse that doesn't often get registered by the public because these individuals are not engaging in traditional forms of overt violence to their partner. It just remains under the radar and causes significant emotional pain. As someone here says, 2 years later and I'm still suffering. Yeah, well, I think a lot of people would be in your shoes as well too. I want to take this moment to say, one of the things that's really brutal about these experiences of avoidant abuse is that it's, some people, when they're victims of domestic violence and physical violence, right? They often might have a part of them that says, well, at least I know this person's not going to leave me because they're still physically violent. Oh, there goes my phone. They're still here. They're still, interacting with me. They're still engaging with me, right? There is something quite violent and brutal about having a partner who just banishes you to the ether, acts like you never even existed and mattered. And I think that just absolutely cuts us to our soul because it makes us feel like we never even had any real connection, impact, love in this experience. And it can be so, I'm going to just say, like, it feels like your soul has just been stabbed violently. So I think one of the things that's really important to understand for those of you that are understanding avoidant abuse, those of you who are first-hand experiences of avoidant abuse, is to understand that, you know, there is such pain for a lot of individuals who go through this because it's often invisible to the public. It's often something that, you know, is even more violent for people than those that have been, you know, hurt physically at times. And I'm not trying to make a distinction and say one's better than the other. I'm not trying to also invalidate those who have been physically abused, because they've gone through tremendous pain as well, and they often feel like they've been just made into an object. I respect that. It's just to say that often there is a sense of visibility for those individuals that is missed for those of you that feel like you've just been brutally murdered without any physical contact whatsoever. So, another point that's raised in this book is, as part of a codependent dynamic, avoidance can subconsciously feel safer with insecure, emotionally reactive, anxious partners, as this way they do not need to deal with the threat of their partner fighting against them for power, nor do they have to deal with their partner's demands for independence and freedom. This is the reason why avoidance, while stigmatizing anxious, preoccupied attachment behaviors more than others, most often end up choosing the very same personality type. They choose anxious, preoccupied as their preferred type of relationship partner. What a surprise. I mean, it's wild to me. Like, I don't know if any of you have actually noticed this. It's really interesting. A lot of avoidance on social media, and I'm presuming these are the severe ones, often bitch about anxious attachers. They'll complain, particularly the fearful avoidance. They will absolutely rake anxious attachers across the coals, being like, they're so needy, they violate boundaries, blah, 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 blah. Yet they continue to choose them because they know that these anxious attachers are more concerned about fear of rejection, and they're not necessarily going to stand up for themselves. And they're also not going to, you know, expose this behavior. So of course, it becomes so much easier to have partners who are predictable, who aren't going to speak up for their own wants and needs. And I think that it is really terrible that these individuals, you know, on one hand denigrate these anxious attachers whilst also at the same time continuing to choose to be with them. It's like, what are you doing? There was actually a really good example of this. There was a person, I don't want to call them a troll, but there was an individual who made a comment on one of my posts last year, where they were basically saying how much they hated anxious attachers, and I'm mean for being mean to avoidance. But in the rant that he was having on my post, it was really good because it explored how it's like, bro, you choose these people. You know, you continue to choose these individuals because obviously there's benefit for you here. If you, like, his hatred for anxious attachers was like through the fucking roof. And I was like, well, it sounds to me like this is something where you're choosing this because this is comfortable for you for one reason or another. And that was an example of where I was just like, this is not particularly okay. I can see someone here says, can you speak on friendship avoidant discards? Does that change the likelihood of whether or not they try to make amends? Short answer is they're pretty much the same as romantic relationships and whether or not they're going to come back and try and make amends, and it's going to be more of the same. Friendship avoidant discards are disgusting, and I've had a few of those in my time, in that the thing that I really find quite awful about them is the fact that you might find that the person prior to the discard was more than a best friend. Sometimes it can even feel a little bit quasi-romantic in the sense that it can often feel like you guys have gotten like real deep and close. It might feel like you found your sister from another mister, your brother from another mother, and it really feels like, oh, this person and I, we just do everything together, it's amazing. And then all of a sudden, you know, this individual just leaves your life abruptly. I've had a few situations where I remember there was one person who I was very close to where I just said to them, hey, look, I really love that you know, you're there for me and you want to support me, but I would also appreciate if you can actually just, you know, hold space for me every now and then when I need to talk to you about some emotional stuff. Never heard from them again off the back of that. There was another person where it was weird, like things got really ambiguous between us in terms of like, I feel like the boundaries between friendship and lovers got crossed a bit, and nothing physically intimate happened, but it was just like, this feels a bit strange. Never heard from him again. And I was like, that's weird. There was another time too where I've had people who I can tell are avoidantly attached, and I tried approaching them for, you know, just to talk to them about what I'm going through in life and how I'm struggling emotionally with something, and they just jump straight into solution mode, and I'm like, don't need that right now. And they really looked quite annoyed and quite ashamed with the fact that they couldn't help me, and I'm like, I didn't ask you to bloody solve my problem. I just wanted you to listen to my issues. And so, yeah, you kind of take what you can get from these cases, but it's hard. It's really hard, because I think that, you know, they come in with a lot of genuine enthusiasm and want to be a great friend at times, but man, the devalue and discard, or the withdraw and detach as I call it, just can do your head in. So yeah, all right, next highlight. According to studies, a combination of narcissistic personality tendencies coupled with high levels of fusion, which I'll explain in a minute, can lead to the employment of an attacking style conflict management and an increased propensity to abusive behavior. Conversely, low levels of fusion generally lead to a more effective communication and negotiation and better conflict resolution, resulting in more optimal outcomes. Okay, so to explain the author's definition of fusion, I assume it's a she, what she is writing here is she's talking about how there are individuals who like to start fights, right? Like they like to start drama, and they're very dysregulated. They're not looking for peace. They're not looking for trying to resolve things. They're just trying to start a fight and to have chaos, because that's how they assert their control, right? And we know that a lot of avoidants can often at times test their partners. I mean, some anxious attachers can do this too, so let's not make it all seem like it's just the one attachment group. But fearful avoidants and dismissives have a tendency at times to try and rock the boat to see how you'll react. And it can be really jarring, because there is a tendency for a lot of them to try and provoke you from time to time to see how you'll react. And so what this author is trying to say is there's a tendency for a lot of these individuals to resort as a communication style to starting a fight in order to feel secure about themselves as well too. Whereas these individuals who are highly insecure with their insecure attachments try and, you know, self-sabotage and ruin things because that's all they know. So that was the point there. And the author then goes on to talk about how the fusion that is created by these avoidant abusers is often a way of them trying to assert control in these relationships. It sort of starts what's called like the drama triangle. They make themselves out to be the victim, you are the villain. They make themselves out to be the savior, you are, you know, the victim, or you're, you know, the villain, depending on the light that they cast themselves into this. So that's usually how it goes. A resilient individual can engage in meaningful, productive, authentic, and transparent communication with the other, even during stressful times. Such a person can have a healthy sense of boundaries and tolerance for proximity without needing to run and disappear, which the more fused, the more emotionally volatile, feel they need to do in order to escape from the unbearable impact they feel. Meaning, a more secure individual can deal with the distress of a bad breakup and can navigate the ramifications of how to like work through that, talk through it, bring up the issues. But a more emotionally unstable individual, someone who is avoidantly attached and emotionally dysregulated, doesn't have the same bandwidth, and they're far more likely to run away rather than deal with the long-term impacts of what's created. And they also can't handle the stress that's been caused, because a lot of them, as I'm sure you know, if you're crying, they can't handle it because they feel like a terrible person. We know a lot of these individuals have big shame wounds about being a bad person. So it is one of those things where these individuals are very good at basically cutting and running to avoid any of the emotional distress that comes up naturally as a consequence of their abrupt endings. The author continues, In a way, their very identity can depend on this validation, and in cases of abuse, they will lie, manipulate, control, and force in order to get it. For an abuser, generating a reaction from their partner in order to reaffirm their own narrative or sense of having power is more important than the real facts or the well-being of their partner, which can be relatively minor or even insignificant in their view. This reaffirmation thus can be at a cost to their partner. Fusion, or creating emotional instability with their partner, is closely associated with the need to be needed. And this need, which is based on the ego at its core, can relate to feelings of inadequacy. An emotionally fused individual requires feedback in order to feel wanted and feel good. This need can be strong that they may require the other to reach extremes of distress in order to feel needed and valued. Okay, so to break it down, we know that a lot of avoidant attachers love being needed, even though they love to tell everyone, I don't have needs, I don't have wants and needs. By the way, guys, if I'm turning my head down, it's just because I'm preparing the next highlight, so you're not watching me with a proverbial loading screen. With regards to this idea of avoidance being needed and creating drama, basically what the author is implying is an avoidant may cause drama with you in order for you to act distressed, helpless, needy, if you will, and for them to feel like, oh, well, I can pacify and solve this and I can work this out, or I can feel needed, I can feel responsible, like I'm a big person, I'm important, I can come in and fix this entire thing, right? So basically what this author is saying is that because avoidants often struggle with low self-esteem, they're thirsty for external validation, they may start a fight in order for you to become, a bit helpless and needy, so that way they feel like they can swoop in and save the day, and it feels better for themselves as well too. I can see someone here has asked, would posting their singleness while talking to you romantically count as testing? No, I think testing would be more, and I've heard fearful avoidants do this, they would probably want to see how you would react if they intentionally stop talking to you for a period of time. Or, I'll give you a better example. Let's say a fearful avoidant is having a fear of abandonment moment. You're getting to know a fearful avoidant. They're freaking out about how this relationship is long distance. I don't know how we can handle this. How are you going to be able to make this work? And you try and reassure them, but then they keep upping the ante over and over and over again throughout the week. What they're doing here is they're testing you to make sure that you won't leave them and you will validate and want them to be there, right? Then there's the avoidance side of the piece, which is when they test you by putting up, walls and barriers and stuff between you and them, because in this instance what they're trying to do is to test you to see, if I do all this crazy shit, I want to see that they won't leave me. And so that is where they might test you to see if you're resilient and you're not going to leave them. That's what I mean by testing. It's where they intentionally play stupid games for you to try and win stupid prizes. It's where they basically try and get you to try and figure them out. And because fearful avoidants have this distorted belief that they don't need to express their wants and needs, but they also want to be understood, they are very difficult individuals on the severe end to navigate relationships with, because they're expecting you to be mind readers whilst also, being basically a doormat to some of their volatile behavior. And there is also a tendency for them to want you, and I'm quoting this from Dr. Sarah Hensley, to just basically apologize 20 million times in order for them to feel better about themselves if they catch you, doing something which they deem to be untrustworthy. There is a tendency for a lot of these individuals to also hold on to grudges and things over things in the past. Let's just say you've resolved an argument a while back and you think, yeah, we got through it. They may not have, and they'll be the first to bring it up and then, use it against you down the line as an excuse as to why things aren't working when they're feeling emotionally reactive. So, let's continue on. Let's see. So this is about the avoidant cutoff, or the abrupt endings and the discards. While this can take place without any conscious awareness or intent to harm, in the case of abuse, the cutoff can be enacted in an aware, intentional, and malicious manner. Abusers can use cutoff strategies such as no contact to withhold crucial information, to bait and provoke, or even to attack the other party. In these cases, cutoff can be used as a means to control, and this can escalate conflict rather than reduce it. So let's see. Just wanted to make sure that okay. So this is a separate point, and this is a good one to raise because this is interesting what the author is noticing here. So when we're talking about psychopathy, the study which is used to describe individuals who have an absence of empathy, conscientiousness, and have low value to relationships, these individuals have often been linked to avoidant styles of attachment. In many cases, the childhood of psychopaths can be seen to be marked by an insecure attachment with their primary caretaker. Studies have found similar relational patterns between psychopathy and avoidant attachment, which link adult emotional instability, fusion, conflict creation with greater psychological distress, coping and problem-solving deficits, decision-making problems, marital discord, and greater abuse potential. Please bear in mind that the author did not say explicitly that all psychopaths or people with cluster B disorders are avoidantly attached. But it's an interesting take. Now, I'm going to share my own take. I haven't seen much research which would suggest this, and I'm not saying that to be, defensive to avoidant attachers unnecessarily. I genuinely haven't seen enough information to say this group of people are all a bunch of psychos. So, with that being said, I do want to make it very clear that whilst it's an interesting claim that this author makes, and there are certainly people, I think Stan Tatkin, who was saying that, a lot of narcissists can have avoidant attachment. I also know that Dr. Ramani has gone on record saying there is a high number of anxiously attached narcissists out there as well too. But this is where it's important, because I see tons of people being like, are they a narcissist or are they avoidant? As if both of those things can't coexist. They absolutely can. You cannot be a narcissist without having an insecure attachment. Doesn't happen. I see someone's asked how to trigger the anxious side of a fearful avoidant. By giving them way too much space that they start wanting to get back with you. They will either do that to you, or you will do that to them when you try and pull away to respect your boundaries. That'll absolutely cause it. Let's see. What do we got here? For avoidant attachers, they rarely experience true acceptance for who they really are. Firstly, because they tend to hide their true selves due to shame or fear of exposing their real vulnerabilities, and secondly, because they often strategize to induce others to fear losing them, as they have little confidence to be truly wanted for who they really are. In this way, they can try to avoid situations and facts that are uncomfortable for them by practical efforts such as objective boundary enforcement, or they can undertake a psychological process such as denial or thought censorship, or by scripting a narrative. I thought this was a really good point because it really illustrates how, for a lot of these avoidant attachers, a lot of them are trying to keep you at arm's length from ever really getting quite close to them, and they'll go to, any length to avoid having you to be that close because they have so much shame and intense guilt about who they are and how they feel. All right, I got some questions here. So, do they ever come back? Oh, sometimes. I mean, it's very 50-50 depending on the person and the circumstances. Can guilt, shame outweigh their love for you when considering coming back to apologize? Hell yeah. Shame is one of the most, if not the most, painful emotion to feel, but it's actually their anxiety that will run the show. So, sorry, your love's never going to win this one, meaning their love is never going to outweigh their fear unless they work on it. Let's see. Yes, they come back. Yeah, exactly. But I want to make it clear, not all of them will. And I've had plenty of avoidant exes who never did. So please don't use this as a thing of me saying they absolutely will. Get excited. Get your second round ready for the next, opportunity to make things right with your avoidant partner. Because as I've said on record many times, they may not come back. And if they do, the next round will be even worse. It'll break up faster, usually. It'll usually be more painful because you think that you're safe and secure. So I'm sorry to say, don't hold out a lot of hope for that. All right. Let's see, what else have we got here? Okay. The conditionality of these avoidance strategies often results in a need of control, controlling both oneself as well as situations and other people in order to ensure that the preferred conditions are not changed, because if that happens, the avoidant can be placed in a very vulnerable position as they have not previously had the opportunity to develop their resilience by facing situations or discomfort or stress. And while I'm loading up the next highlight, this is a really good point that the author is making, because a lot of avoidant attachers have not had a lot of, emotional resilience. And what I mean by emotional resilience is they haven't really learned how to sit with their emotions and actually learn from it. A mark of wisdom and aging is that you often listen to how your body's feeling and also the visceral emotions that come up. You might learn that anger is telling you that, hey, there's some boundary violations, I need to work on it. You might learn that anxiety is trying to tell you that I feel like there's an absence of control, there's an absence of security and consistency, and I need to find out ways to work through this rather than reacting out of panic. Unless there's like a serious issue like a tiger chasing you, that's a different, story. The point is, a lot of avoidant attachers haven't actually worked through their internal emotional stuff, right? So when you don't work through a lot of that, make meaning of it, and also learn to work with it, you are emotionally stunted. And I've gone on record talking about how a lot of these individuals have big Peter Pan syndrome, emotional arrested development. So you're often dealing with people who can handle the happy times. I can, be there for the physical affection, the acts of service, the words of affirmation sometimes. But when it comes to that quality time, those deeper, more uncomfortable moments where death is on the table, we're dealing with relatives who are unwell, or I'm unwell, we're dealing with moments of relational stress about how to make our lives come together and to make it work. When we're navigating a child who might be transitioning and going through a gender identity crisis or sexuality issues as well too, that's where they really struggle, because they don't know how to deal with those more complex life experiences as well. All right, let's move on to the next highlight. I may have to do a part 2 because I've got so many. Avoidance, instead of expressing emotions directly, can express them in passive-aggressive ways to convey their unhappiness. While they can enact self-control to prevent immediate expression, the core issues can remain unaddressed, often leading to the build-up of a grudge. When annoyed, rather than express their irritation directly, they can suppress it, increase their wrath, and support it to use vengefully at a later point. Over time, the anger can grow against the perceived culprit, and when revenge is finally enacted, the abuser, the avoidant, can be found to be quite disconnected from reality. For example, to avoid discomfort, an avoidant abuser may withhold communication and go to great lengths over long periods of time to prevent confrontation, rather than addressing the basic issue of why the discomfort exists in the first place and solving the problem by facing their fears, engaging in communication, and achieving healthy resolution. Well, for those of you that have been long-time viewers, you know that when it comes to dealing with conflict, communication, and big issues within a relationship, avoidant attachers have a tendency to do the complete opposite of that. And I think it really speaks to the fact that, a lot of these individuals really do not have the bandwidth or the capability to work on this. So we've got another one here. The thinking process of avoidance can be based on insecurity and flawed belief systems, which do not value history, memories, truth, meaning, significance, or connection. Nor do they encourage an individual to encompass and evolve and go through life experiences, but instead prefer practices such as cutting off and deletion, which can help keep habitual avoidance somewhat stunted in terms of their personal evolution. Further on, when we look at developing and articulating a response to the abuse, we will see how successfully moving on can include inclusiveness rather than denial. In other words, it can involve acknowledging experiences rather than cutting off from them. Okay, this is one that I'm going to point to all you lot. That's very true for the avoidant abusers, but we've also got to remember One of the things that bothers me that I see in a lot of individuals who are recovering from avoidant abuse or an avoidant breakup is this tendency for us to enter a little phase of, being a bit avoidant to ourselves. We ask ourselves, did that person ever really love me? Fair, because that's a very confusing experience, get it? We often ask ourselves, were they a narcissist, as if to say they were just all bad and that they were terrible, when in fact the truth is more complicated than that. And we have a tendency to also downplay these events, being like, maybe they just never loved me, maybe they never cared, and maybe I just hallucinated the entire thing, right? That all makes sense. I totally get why you'd feel that way. But one of the biggest disservices we can do ourselves is be avoidant to our own lived experience. There was a time when you and this person were truly engaging in big positive emotions for each other. If you don't feel comfortable calling it love, fine. Call it what feels appropriate. And then at some point there was inconsistency, hot and cold behavior, and or an abrupt breakup, which was marked by a very sudden departure of, the behavior that I'd seen before. Your narrative, your truth should be able to help you make sense of this. Too often I find, and it's a normal reaction, don't worry, I often find a lot of people struggle with cognitive dissonance. How can someone love me and treat me like this? How can they be wanting to go on holidays with me one minute, dumping me the next? How can they tell me that I'm their soulmate, dump me and go off to marry the next person they see and do all the things that I wanted to do with them with the next person? Unfortunately, also I don't want to say it is what it is, this is all part of the experience. Now, I understand that if those of you who don't understand avoidant attachment, I know it's question mark minefield, I get that. But one of the things we have to understand is that part of the recovery journey for us is building a narrative around this that makes sense and encapsulates the experience based on truth. I worry at times when people jump to the narcissistic label is that they often have a tendency to then say, these people were players. These individuals were just malicious. They wanted to just destroy us. They wanted to have their supply and move on to the next person. To a degree, there's a little bit of that going on. The danger of having that narrative is that you then miss out on actually doing the deeper inner work on yourself, which is, but I was still drawn to this person because it wasn't just because they were an expert manipulator. There would have been some other aspect to this experience that really drew you in, and it's important to remember that as well too. And it's good to remember those good times. I still remember my avoidant ex. He and I had the best fucking dates I've ever had in my life. But, would I want to go through the experience again? No thanks. I'll remember it and be like, that was wonderful. Love the times when we were really connected. But the breakup, I've never been through something more traumatic than that in my life. So that's why I want to say, let's just be very mindful of how we go about that. Okay, let's see. Oh, this is a really good point. It is perfectly possible for avoidant abuse strategies to be enacted by those who are not avoidant and those who do not have a personality disorder such as avoidant personality disorder, BPD, psychopathy, or narcissism. Good to know. And I think that actually is true because we often see that a lot of people who engage in avoidant abuse may not necessarily have an avoidant attachment at all times. For the purposes of this discussion, I am exclusively discussing this with regards to avoidant attachment, but it's a good point to raise, and I agree with the author, because it is something that can absolutely, I think, is predominant in people with avoidant attachment. Let's see. When one partner is more secure and the other more insecure, whether that be anxious or avoidantly attached, the behavior of the more secure partner can sometimes be modified, whether consciously or unconsciously, to accommodate the needs of the less secure person. I agree. In my experience, I've often found that no matter how securely attached you are, secure attachment is not necessarily like a silver bullet to insecure attacher behavior. Because a lot of that stuff is really quite problematic in the sense that when you're dating someone, right, who has like big insecurities and they're that intimate with you, you can often be molding yourself to adapt to the drama that's going on here. So that's why it's really important to understand that, even if you have a secure attachment, you can still be vulnerable to these experiences, but it doesn't mean to say you'll be, blind to them in the future. Getting educated on this, healing from your wounds, working on understanding better boundaries, they can absolutely protect you better. But I want to make it clear that just because you have a secure attachment, don't beat yourself up too much if you have this experience, because it can absolutely happen even to the best of us. And covert abuse is very sneaky, very insidious, and it's one of those things where it sort of feels like the boiled frog effect, in that it's not something that you're likely to, consciously recognize as happening in the moment. All right. Avoidant abusers often exercise power indirectly by withholding communication, whether it is to make their partner feel powerless — the author here writes target instead of partner, but I'm using them interchangeably — or to see themselves as being the one who is more powerful and who is able to have an impact upon the other. In addition, this refusal to communicate also begets a sense of feeling intensely needed and desirable, and this can be enhanced by intentionally denying their input to the other. In this manner, avoidance can make the avoided one feel more insecure, meaning they can make you, the recipient, feel more insecure. And if they express this insecurity by making increased demands, be it by request or more persistently, it can consequently help the avoidant feel even more desired. So in other words, if you try and increase your demands for communication, it can make the avoidant feel more needed and powerful in their own ways too. And it can also push them away depending on the circumstances. This can help them feel more in control of the situation and in control of you. This dynamic is the secret behind the power of withholding. Avoidance in and of itself is primarily a position of power, as the avoidant has seemingly lesser needs from the other. The person who cares least inevitably tends to wield the most power. I actually agree with this, and we'll talk about that in just a whole second. The individual with greater needs remains more vulnerable and relatively powerless. The avoidant partly generally displays lesser desire whether to communicate or resolve issues, lesser interest to negotiate, and in general, a lesser desire or need for the relationship to continue, as well as a lesser desire to be with the other. Okay, so this phrase, which tends to get thrown around a lot, is the one who has the least to win, or the one who has the least needs, is the one who holds the most power. And I believe that this is something that is very true for a lot of avoidant attachers, in that because avoidants often play a game with themselves to try and show, just how detached they are. Detachment is their superpower. They believe. It's not, as a lot of us know. But a lot of them truly believe that their superpower is being able to detach themselves from another human being and to not have to have wants and needs, right? So we often find, for a lot of these individuals, they often do maintain a lot more power in a relationship because they don't often speak up for their wants and needs. They resent you when you don't know what their wants and needs are because they refuse to express it because you should just know. And often you may find that you're tiptoeing around them because you don't want to set them off, even if you know they're not necessarily like an obvious abuser. They're not like shouting and screaming at you. You just know that they have a tendency to become, let's just say defensive anytime you bring up an emotional matter. You may find that when it comes to this particular issue of needs, whether it be a situationship or a relationship, the avoidant will often have more power over you because you are a person who does want to have a more fulfilling relationship. You want to feel like there's involvement, investment, there's connection, right? And because the avoidant is trying to distance themselves away from you, and often they're also playing in their own script about how, I don't need to have needs. Needs are for the weak. I don't need to do this. And often when they do cut you off, they often do maybe get a rush of feeling like, oh, see, problem solved. I don't need anyone. The danger is that, and to anyone who understands Jungian psychology will get this, we can't outrun our needs, and our unmet needs will end up haunting us down the line. These individuals, though they love to talk about their independence, are some of the most needy individuals on the planet. When you've gone, hungry for a long time, do you think your hunger, cues and signals are going to go ignored? You're biologically going to go and seek out food. It's like anyone who has like an eating disorder, right? When you don't eat enough, you're more prone to binge eating that's uncontrollable because your body's like, I need to eat now. Go get me food. So the reality is that no matter how much we try and deny our own body, our own wants and needs, it is one of those things where that does cause a lot of problems. So yeah, these individuals are often subject to their own wants and needs, even though I will tell them they're very good at acting like they don't have wants and needs. And I tell you what, that defensiveness is gonna, peak the more close you are to them in a relationship. Someone here says, do you know anything about how fearful avoidants act during intimacy? He never made eye contact. He never kissed me when we were intimate. Honestly, it depends. Fearful avoidants occupy a huge spectrum. Beautiful range of people. There's so many colorful characters in that range, right? So some of them who are more on the anxious end might be very intense, intimate, loving, and really, really, really connect and bond with you. But those on the more dismissive end might look away from you. They might struggle to be physically close with you. They might, at one hand, want to hold hands with you as they're walking, but then other times walk ahead of you. They might find ways to downplay their need to be close with you as well too. There can be moments where, they may withhold from having sex with you altogether. They could be hypersexual as well too. They could be people who want to connect with you exclusively through sex, but they don't want to actually have any emotional connection with you and talk about their feelings. If you're ever going through a tough time, they might want to physically cuddle with you and hold you without actually listening properly to what you're saying, because they think, oh, well, I can help this person by being needed. I can be there for them, without actually really sitting and listening. So whilst dismissives are more likely to withdraw and to just not want to deal with any of that sort of stuff, fearful avoidance, there's a tendency for them to show a wild range of behavior, but that avoidant attachment side will rear its head every time when things start to get deeper, and that's when the withdrawing happens before the detachment phase. All right, let's continue. Avoidant abusers, as we will see, generally abhor responsibility, especially for things that may be unfavorable for their public image. Yes, and as I've talked a lot about with avoidant attachers, particularly fearfuls, they're very big on their impression management. They can be excellent chameleons. They can be bloody good at wanting to show up how people think they should show up. They're very particular about what they say to people. I've had, avoidant attacher clients, when they're in recovery, admit, hey, I recognize I have a tendency of lying. It's self-protection. I do this to help myself to maintain my image because I just don't want people knowing about certain facts of me. And I'm saying this from a place of non-judgmentality for these clients that I work with. I love working with them because they're amazing people to work with and they've got amazing stuff to share with me, and I think they're doing fabulous work on themselves. When you're on the receiving end of someone who is aware of the fact that they are lying to maintain a public image though, that's pretty fucking frustrating because they're not being honest with you, and they're also not being very honest with themselves. So there is a high tendency for those that are avoidantly attached to lie to protect their public image. Oh, this is one that I think a lot of you will relate to, and I've talked about it too. The avoidant abuser will abuse any compassion shown to them, because what the abuser truly wants is not just power and control, but to be able to use their power to impose their will and take away the other's consent. So this is I know I just used the word avoidant and I added it to the word abuser there too for the context of this book, but it's true. Two things. Abusers want power and control. Abusers also aren't looking for compassion because it makes them feel like shit because they're not capable of doing the same and they often don't think they're worth it. But avoidant attachers and anxious attachers can have deep difficulty accepting love and compassion from others. Specifically for avoidant attachers, you may find that, let's say you get them a thoughtful gift, they may be incredibly uncomfortable with it. They may lose it, and give it to a friend. They may put it away somewhere because they can't handle it because it feels too close for them and they feel like it doesn't work well for them. There's also a tendency for them to maybe, resent you for the gift. they also may, bring it up later about how this is too much and this is too, close, or I don't like the fact that you're gift giving, you're trying to manipulate me. So they can be, in the realm of gift giving, they can be very squeamish. When you try and do nice things for them, they may resent you for it because, again, it's their shame, it's their wounding of being like, I'm unlovable, why would you do this for me? You must be pathetic to love me. That can be a voice that happens from their external critic. Whenever I refer to the inner critic, it's like a coin. There's the inner critic and the external critic. So often what you get is an inner critic going external on you. That's what I mean when I refer to like the external critic. Projection, gaslighting, like trying to make out like you're weak and pathetic. Anytime I hear external critic stuff come out, my brain usually goes, oh, you probably grew up in a very narcissistic household, because I know what it's like to have that. And it's also one of those things too where if you have a need to constantly tear someone apart, you probably grew up in a very degrading environment, socially speaking. Avoidant abusers often instinctively understand the intricate workings of emotional chaos, instability, and fights, notably of how to manufacture it. They can do this intentionally and with awareness, and then feign unawareness or even claim that their actions were done in some way to actually benefit you, while simultaneously holding you directly responsible for their suffering due to their inability to get over things. I've actually heard cases of this with clients. Like recently, I heard a client who was confronting their partner for cheating, and their partner basically just erupted like Mount Vesuvius and was like, well, this marriage has been fucked all along. You did this to me. And the person who was on the receiving end of this was very good at just being like, no, this is what you did. I've got the receipts. I'm not putting up with this. And it was really interesting because by all accounts, the avoidant then admitted to what they had done, but then got into a real froth about it, stormed off, and then came back later trying to act like a changed person about how they're going to try and work on the marriage, go to therapy, and they were trying to like bake cookies for their partner and make it seem all right. Yet they were clearly just so dysregulated and didn't know how to deal with the shame. All right, oh, this is a good one. This book was so good for lots of stuff. But again, please take it with a pinch of salt. This one, this book obviously, has, again, like I said, has a few limitations to it, but I think that within the context of what we're talking about, I think there's benefit to this. Avoidant abusers often hook in their target with mystery and make themselves more desirable than they actually are, maintaining a carefully constructed wall of mystery, meaning they look like a brick wall that looks attractive to, lure you in. Which is impossible to penetrate and can act as a cover and mask the true plain facts. It can prevent a natural process of the target, you, being able to normalize the person or relationship, which would take place naturally with communication and transparency. This is a powerful point. I've said before how, one of the things that's really quite painful for a lot of people is they often feel like they were in what I call an extended honeymoon phase with the avoidant. Meaning that if we use some of this language, you're dating like a fascinating wall, the facade, it's so pretty, but you never got into the side of the fucking building because, the building, internally, feels like it's got asbestos debris and it's disgusting on the inside. And by the way, the building, I'm personalizing here, the building thinks it's disgusting and is filled with poisonous gases and fumes, but only wants to show you the pretty surface, right? No wonder it's trying to keep you out. Now, the problem with this too is that if you're constantly focusing on impression management and not actually thinking about the impact of your actions, it leads a lot of you to feel like you're dating Prince Charming, the Princess Bride. Probably not the best example, but you know what I mean? Like you're dating someone who looks amazing and they just keep not letting you in because they feel like they have all this stuff going on inside of them. As this book continues to add, mystery increases attraction, secrecy hides information, and ambiguity causes confusion. All right, let's continue. The way others cannot act but only react, enabling the avoidant to keep others in control while they themselves remain the ones controlling the situation. The recipient can even be held responsible and blamed for various things by the avoidant if they decide to turn around the version of events in their own memory and understanding. Abusers can make themselves believe and feel as if the recipient is the only one at fault for whatever wrong is perceived by them. In this way, the avoidant abuser can project their issues onto the other and place all the blame onto them. Yep, that's a story that I think a lot of people have probably heard. Now, I want to make a little point here. This behavior of projection, right? And, wanting to turn all this stuff onto others is something that can happen defensively for a lot of avoidant attachers, meaning this may be something they've learned how to do growing up. It doesn't mean they're necessarily trying to be malicious. But one thing that you've got to bear in mind when you're reading this book is this book is not fucking around. This book, if you choose to read it, is really looking at this from the perspective of perpetrator, target, right? So please take some of this language with a pinch of salt, that your individual cases may not have had someone who is out to fucking destroy you. But if it feels like this lands for you and you're like, yeah, I really felt like this person was out to get me, fan-fucking-tastic. Amazing. As you might have heard across some of the Ken Reed's episodes, whenever you listen to them, you might have noticed that there's a real smorgasbord of different individuals. That even though the story remains the same, love bomb, withdraw, detach, the spectrum for which these individuals lie is just huge, massive. And I can see someone here's referenced Men Who Can't Love, and I hope you enjoyed that book because I did. I read it in like one day. These individuals aren't all sitting at like narcissistic personality disorder territory. They might definitely have high narcissistic traits because that's a reflection of the environment they grew up in, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're outwardly malicious. So yeah, that's where I just want to make it very clear and say, please be mindful of the fact that this book is quite intense in its language, but I think it will validate those of you that probably felt like you were dealing with someone who may have had some cluster B stuff going on in between as well too. All right. Closure is often the final, sometimes desperate request of those who are already suffering from the effects of avoidance and withholding. Before I continue this one, I actually want to make a point. This author, I can see someone here's after the name of the book. This book is called Avoidant Abuse. The author is Ria Khan. Back to this. This author made such a phenomenal point where they said, no one would need to seek closure in a relationship if it was done so in a secure manner. I'm misquoting, but the point was really to say there is only one instance where you'd be seeking closure in a relationship, and it's likely because there was some avoidant abuse, meaning there was critical withholding of information that was pertinent to the health of the relationship, right? If you broke up with someone amicably and you said to someone like, oh, look, I think we've got some compatibility issues and we can't continue, why the fuck would you need to go back to them to get more answers, right? Someone here's asked, can I watch the rest of this talk later? Yeah, you can go. It's all good. I record all the lives that I do, so you can come back later and watch it. The book's called Avoidant Abuse, and you can find it on Google if you type in Avoidant Abuse by Ria Khan. So one thing I just want to state here is that with regards to closure, right? Like, why would you need to have a closure conversation with someone if you already know what the issues are? Why would you need to seek out information, about, a relationship if you already know what the problems were that led to the end of it, right? Like, in most cases when I've ended relationships, whether they be with friends, family members, loved ones, it got to a point where it was like, there are some serious issues between me and you that we've tried to resolve and then just not getting better. So I think it's okay to accept it is what it is. There is acceptance, indifference. You're like, okay, I wish you all the best. But when it comes to avoidant abuse, there is, this is why I hate the whole get your ex back coaches. The only reason you would be even wanting to get an ex back is because the relationship isn't done yet. Meaning that your avoidant broke up with you mid-relationship or situationship, and you're in the thick of still being in love with this person. So my opinion, please take what I'm about to say with a pinch of salt, is that all those Get Your Ex Back coaches are actually deceptive, misleading, and incredibly harmful to those of you that are out there. Because in my opinion, no person who's ended a relationship with a degree of amicability or just being like, yeah, we're done for even, non-amicable reasons would ever need to get an ex back, right? Like there's absolutely no need to do that. So if that's the case, we have an industry of people who are actually really, really, really doing terrible damage to a lot of you who are feeling quite vulnerable. And I'm not afraid to say, I just think a lot of these Get Your Ex Back coaches are so unethical. Worse is when they identify with avoidant attachment and they're trying to tell you how to look less needy for your avoidant partner, make a good impression, go no contact because that'll get them back in. No, it fucking won't. Not necessarily. So that's my little rant on that. But back to this. So, if an uncoupling process is carried out in an authentic, transparent, compassionate, and respectful manner without withholding and avoidance in the first place, the need to ask for closure generally does not arise. In fact, in an abusive context, asking for closure often implies that some avoidance or abuse has already taken place. Approaching an abuser for closure in this situation can be akin to dropping into the jaws of a predator. This is partly the reason why asking for closure almost always never works. The real closure many seek would need to be offered willingly on the individual's own initiative. Often then it is likely to be genuine and provide what is actually required. To plead or beg or manipulate or force is not going to provide a satisfactory response, nor a response worth receiving. The other party can pretend to give closure and pacify the target while being inauthentic and deceitful. They can try to pacify with lies and withhold the true facts, providing an unsatisfactory response, or they can use the opportunity to bait and attack. Those who have been through narcissistic relationships will definitely understand that one. But yeah, I think this is something that this is something that I see a lot in cases of avoidant abuse, is that, a lot of you are understandably looking for closure, and it is one of those things where they do deny a lot of it when you do need it because you've been given, no information that helps you to recover from it. All right, the author continues. Avoidant abusers in reality do not ever manage to truly get over or move on. Instead, they prefer to collect their victims, who they would like to have remain forever hooked onto them. Even if this idea is largely a fantasy in their own minds or based on manipulated responses, this collection of those who could never get over me and move on can provide an unparalleled ego boost for avoidant abusers. The ideology behind collecting victims as trophies is the very antithesis of respect, value, and honor. Now, personally, I think this is a very Machiavellian way of looking at avoidants who have what I call their harem of exes. I think it's a little bit much in the language. I think that's a bit narcissistic, if I'm completely honest. But we do know that a lot of avoidant attachers have, their exes who are seemingly terrible that they often return to from time to time. So I do think that, that even though this language may be dripping in, a lot of intensity, I'll agree on the basis that there is truth behind this. I think that, as this person says, I think my fearful avoidant ex thinks I never fully moved on and secretly gets a kick out of it. Oh yeah, totally. Again, it goes back to that thing of they want to feel needed. So it makes sense. This book talks about how they don't really like no contact, which I thought was really interesting. So this book goes on to say, the practice of no contact promoted in popular culture as a largely acceptable means of conduct, especially post-breakup, can be problematic as it tends to encourage maladjusted or insecure functioning people and to shelter the practice of avoidant abuse strategies. Many can misguidedly enact no contact with undesirable or harmful consequences. Okay, so the author here makes a really interesting case for no contact, and I kind of agree with it. So many avoidants, as you know, will go no contact on you to engage in their withdrawing and to engage in their truth withholding, right? We know that to be true, and that's a true act of avoidance because they're trying to put up walls to not, engage with you, right? But the author also makes a really interesting case that when we go no contact, there is a danger here in that we're using the same tactics that they use now on ourselves and others instead of actually getting some rightful answers and to work through this. Here's my 2 cents on no contact real quick. I think no contact is a bit of a, how do I put it? I think it's very situational. Meaning, I think there are some people who would benefit from going no contact because it allows them to, to overcome the withdrawal effects of being, broken up with by someone with avoidant attachment. I think it has its benefits, but there needs to be big context. I find no contact is way too hard on a lot of you because when you've just had an abrupt breakup and your nervous system is so dysregulated, I find a lot of you struggle to make that clean cut for yourselves because it's very hard on your nervous system, and there are parts of you that may be so coiled like a snake around a tree that just don't want to let go of the tree for fear of potentially, losing this individual for dear life. I don't encourage no contact for everyone because I think that it can actually do more psychological harm. It would be like telling someone who's been a hard junkie, someone who's had a serious addiction, excuse me using the word junkie, I know that's very pejorative, but someone who's been a big, addict, right? Someone who's had big addiction issues, to just cut the substance right off and go cold turkey. The danger of doing that is it encourages restriction. It encourages, a lot of mental discipline, but your body can retaliate against that because if your nervous system is in a position where you're like, oh no, I can't, I just can't, let go of this person just yet because my nervous system won't let me. Don't fight your nervous system. There are ways to do, more gradual steps that lead to no contact that can often be better for you, which is why I prefer low contact for a lot of you. If you're someone who's just gone through a bad breakup with an avoidant, I do not recommend going no contact. Sorry, my battery has just gone to 20%. I don't recommend a lot of you go no contact because it's too hard on your system. Avoidance, on the other hand, as someone said, they can be much, much better at no contact because they're great at banishing their partners. I mean, they're experts at being able to detach themselves. Bear in mind, as I take you guys on a journey, I'm just plugging my cord in so that way you don't get interrupted. But I think for you lot, if you're trying to necessarily go no contact, I think you've got to consider the impact that it's going to have on your nervous system and whether or not you're actually ready to commit to potentially not seeing that person again. I know for me, it caused me so much unnecessary anxiety. I was worrying what are they going to think of me if I don't reach out? Are they worried that I block them? Are they this or they that? Too hard. I don't recommend it. It's not to say that no contact isn't for everyone. I have gone no contact successfully with a lot of people when I have the capacity to do it. It's actually kind of easy for me now because I have a system for working through it, but I don't recommend it for everyone. All right, so, okay, this is a great one. In addition to the no contact part, the kind of assertions that no contact is closure can legitimize abusive acts and give these individuals credibility as being acceptable, allowing the avoidant abuser the right to impose their dysfunctional way upon others. It can also create misunderstanding of the very meaning of closure, which I agree, because I think that, avoidant attachers have a tendency, those that are severe, to impose this idea of you don't need me to provide you closure, you find that in yourself. They have a tendency to create this narrative of just, I don't need to be able to support you emotionally, you need to go figure that out for yourself. They don't want to be held accountable, and they tend to impose their own, avoidant strategies and tendencies on you as a way of not having to take responsibility for what they've done. So I think in that case, the no contact ends up actually serving them and not you. Let's see. There can exist as a part of a larger framework which include ideas related to positive thinking. Oh, okay, I know what this point was about. So I'll continue it. So Positive thinking, which refers to looking forward towards the future and stigmatizing looking back at the past as being negative or unproductive or even harmful. Okay, so what the author is talking about here is that idea of when the avoidant attacher is trying to forget about you, negative experiences, there's this tendency for them to, as the author said, stigmatize the past. I don't think it's necessary to look back into the past. Why would I go to therapy? I've already dealt with my trauma. We don't need to talk about the past. There is a tendency for a lot of them to then say things like, I'm just moving on with my future. I'm just, moving forward. I don't need to think about the past, right? So what often happens is that this toxic positivity often, becomes a very, very, forceful way of them denying and also trying to not have to think about their previous partners, something traumatic, whatever it may be. And it's a form of toxic positivity that often gets said by a lot, particularly of fearful avoidance, because often a lot of them have this idea that, the past is painful. I get it. They've been through some pretty shitty times. So it's far better to just, think ahead, move on to the next thing, and get on top of my life. The thing for a lot of fearful avoidance is their lives are often chaotic as fuck. Like, I really feel sorry for a lot of them. So many of them, beautiful as they may be in personality, often have the most chaotic up and down lives. Their jobs are all over the shop. Their family life is the stuff of nightmares. Their friends are neither here nor there, and the only thing they seem to think that they can manage is their relationships. And that often causes people like yourself tremendous pain if they're not in therapy working on themselves. But I will give credit to the fearful avoidance working on themselves, is that those that are working on themselves are so fucking aware, good at understanding their trauma and their history, and often end up having pretty good lives off the back of it too. So I gotta give them credit where it's due. Alright, let's continue. Let's see. What was this? Fuse. There are times when I just didn't write the notes, like I didn't write what I wrote these notes down for, but it seems to be working so far. I think this one's talking about minimization. So an example of minimization is when avoidants openly claim that their refusal to communicate or to respond to communication is simply due to their own laziness and apathy, and refuse to change or make any minimal effort. Such avoiders can be unapologetic whilst they achieve comfort at the cost of the recipient's discomfort or even distress. Abusers can often harbour these kinds of attitudes openly. Here, the avoidant behaviour can be executed as minor transgressions, whilst its effects and consequences, even when severe, are overlooked. Okay, so I've got a better example of this, and I think a lot of you will understand what I'm about to say. When the avoidant attacher tells you, I'm not good at texting. I don't respond to my friends, all the time. My friends always complain that I don't text them all the time. That is often used a lot by avoidance as a get-out-of-jail-free card to not have to communicate with you. And I see a lot of them do this where they're like, oh yeah, I'm just really bad at texting back, or yeah, I'm just really bad at communication, as if to say they can get away with it and not be held accountable or responsible. So the danger of this particular boundary is that they will use that against you when you ask for more communication. They'll say, I can't give you what you need. You're being too much. There is a tendency for them to, make their under-communication a character quirk, and it's one of those things where it can really fuck you over when you need critical information. And I've seen some fearful avoidance in particular slap back against their partners when they've discarded them, who are asking, hey, can I please get some answers on this? And they'll say things like, I don't know why you're expecting me to communicate with you more. I literally told you that I don't communicate much. My friends barely even get as much from me, and you're asking me for more. You need to go work on your insecurities and your trauma. Projection and also bullying much. I am going to do reels on that eventually, because I get so, my eyes go to the back of my skull every time I hear an avoidant say, I just don't do texting. I'm a bad texter. In this day and age, you being a bad texter is not acceptable. So, too fucking bad. Alright. Under the cover of immaturity, abusers can claim incompetence when they are acting with malicious intent. The idea of immaturity can minimize abuse as naughtiness, which can detract from the serious consequences of their acts. Calling such abusers or their behavior immature can underestimate how dangerous these types of people can be. The author has a point. Look, as you know, I often talk about how a lot of emotional, unavailable behavior is a form of immaturity, that a lot of avoidant attachers, even those on the severe end, aren't necessarily trying to be intentionally malicious. However, the author raises a good point that we shouldn't just, excuse immaturity as a way of, being, again, a get-out-of-jail-free card. You know what I mean? So that's why I think it's problematic when that shit happens. By the way, I'm going to take a little moment to do a bit of advertising. So this is your little 1-minute advertisement break from me. So, for those of you that may not know, I just today released my new course from Blindsided to Breakthrough, First Steps to Healing. It's for those of you that have just experienced an avoidant breakup and are looking for ways to work through the first stage of that breakup process. Now, I would love it for those of you that are interested to sign up and to go through the course for a couple of reasons. One, I believe that it will help you through that first stage. And you may be asking, why first stage, not the whole thing? Because those of you that have gone through a full experience of an avoidant breakup know it's a multi-stage thing that takes a lot of time and it's quite complex and comprehensive. So, for those of you that have just kind of gone off, come off the back of an abrupt breakup and are looking for help through it, I'd love it if you could undertake that course, because it would then be really helpful for me, because as this is a beta test, we're collecting feedback, it'll really help me then go on to create more sophisticated things outside of one-on-one counseling, therapy, and coaching for those of you that are going through an avoidant breakup. So I'm currently selling it for 150 Australian dollars. It goes for about 11 days, and the content's drip fed and there's activities in there. So if you are someone who fits that criteria, or you just want to help me out, totally fine, I appreciate that. Better if you're someone who's currently going through a breakup and you're in that fresh sort of stage of being maybe a month, 2 months out, you can purchase it on my stories. You may not be able to do it right now because I've currently got my lives going on. So at the end of this, if you're open to checking it out, that would be great. It took a lot of the feedback from last year's course, which I know disappointed a lot of people because it wasn't avoidant focused or had enough content in there that people were looking for. But this one's taken a lot of that feedback on to be more robust and comprehensive. So anyways, all that is to say is, if that's something you're open to, would love for you to go check it out and grab it. The link is currently on my stories, which I know you probably can't access now, but I'll be done with this live shortly and then you can go purchase it. Anyways, let's continue. So, it's very common to hear avoidants claim that one has every right to refuse contact. Such assertions, however, can overlook the existence of any justification of this right, leaving it to be interpreted in a manner which can suggest avoidant abusers, such as refusing to provide important information to the recipient, or the avoidant using their avoidance to socially ostracize the recipient, their partner, as part of a larger abuse campaign, and easily let themselves escape. I've seen this happen actually. I had a nightmare case where there was a person who was dating a fearful avoidant, and this has happened actually a few times. The fearful avoidant partner basically was starting to go out with another person whilst they were still in a relationship, and they downplayed what they were doing, saying, no, they're just a friend. And then all of a sudden, they ghosted their main partner to then get with this friend that they were seeing. And then when the partner who'd been blindsided reached out for answers, they were basically told that they were a needy stalker, and the fearful avoidant, went on to then create a smear campaign, basically, calling this person out as a needy stalker, and didn't want to face any accountability for their bullshit behavior. And it got so bad that it then went into forums on social media where this partner who'd been blindsided had been completely ostracized. So yeah, that is quite common, unfortunately. I can see someone here's asked me, will I answer any of the questions in the Q&A section? Yes, I shall. I'm going to do a speed run of that in a minute because I've nearly spoken for 2 hours and I need lunch. So I will get to that soon. I appreciate a lot of you guys have been asking me lots of questions, but I've just wanted to get through this because I thought this was good material. So I apologize for being a bit slow. All right. When claiming the right to privacy, it must be noted that the need for privacy does not outweigh the right of the other party to receive crucial information which concerns and affects them. 100 billion%. Any privacy which is claimed at the cost of the recipient's distress or discredit can be questionable in its terms of legitimacy. So true. I think this is very accurate. And again, we often see a lot of avoidant attachers using terms like boundaries, privacy, psychobabble. They have a tendency to use a lot of therapeutic terms to avoid, having to actually deal with conflict and confrontation. And I'm going to take a moment here to say, if you are particularly a straight man, beware. I have seen a lot of straight men who have a tendency to be victimized by a lot of women who are avoidantly attached, particularly those that are on the severe end, who take advantage of you. And there is a tendency for a lot of them to play the Me Too card against you when they're not being legitimate and genuine. There is a tendency for them to call you out as being a stalker, for being, a sex pest or whatever is appropriate to the language that they're using. And the reason I'm specifically pointing this out to you is because given the stigma that men are perpetrators of violence, which statistically is true in that there is statistically more evidence to suggest men commit violence against women in heteronormative settings, we get it. The danger is that the abuse that happens to you, particularly from avoidant women, gets overlooked. And I got to tell you, this also happens in LGBTQIA+ settings too. I see a lot of guys who are gay who end up getting overlooked because of the abuse that happens to them. And some police services, at least here in Australia, do not look out for you because they think men can't actually be hurt by, other people. It's a, women-only issue. Now, that is not to say women are not abused and they shouldn't be protected. They absolutely should. It is simply to say that, unfortunately, we live in an age where a lot of people still don't believe that a man can be abused. And when you are being abused through covert abuse and you are a man, particularly a straight man, and the evidence is being stacked against you by a woman where it sounds like, she's in the right and you don't actually have a clear case, you're fucked. And it can really screw you over. Because I have seen, like I said, a lot of straight men who are being really badly treated by a lot of avoidant women. So just putting that out there and saying that does happen. And it will be content for another time as well too, because I do feel very sorry for a lot of you, because it can really blindside and screw you over. All right. Many avoidant abusers, however, not only refuse to communicate face-to-face, they also refuse to interact in any way at all, even if indirectly, such as by phone or by writing or by using a mediator. Avoidant abusers can reveal their abusive intentions when they go to great lengths and much difficulty to avoid even a simple exchange. When a risk-free and direct communication with a quick relaying of required information would be so much easier. I'm sure a lot of you have definitely felt as though, this has been very hard for you to even get one meaningful conversation out of these people. You got to think about it too. If these individuals are struggling to have a conversation with you about what they've done, it really suggests a lot of culpability on their part as well too. All right. As we've seen before, fears of confrontation can exist due to issues of attachment insecurity. Avoidants can be afraid that if they do communicate, this is a good one, they will get talked into committing to something they do not wish to. The point to note is that it is not necessarily because the other person is actually manipulative or possessive. Instead, it may be because the avoidant abuser has an oversensitivity to feelings of being overwhelmed or engulfed to normal levels of interaction and feels discomfort and invasion more sensitively than normal. And this fear can make them reluctant to communicate directly face to face. Or else, it may be because the avoidant has poor boundaries where they can be unwilling to assert themselves as it may cost them likability or popularity, Such individuals will say yes when they really want to say no, and then secretly plan punishment over the long haul for feeling forced to do something they didn't really wish to. In these cases, the fear of confrontation can exist as a type of paranoia. So, I love this point so much because it really does speak to so many facets of the avoidant attacher experience, right? We got fear of enmeshment, fear of losing independence. We also have this idea that the avoidant doesn't think they can actually assert their own boundaries. It's almost as if to say, like, they have this real belief that they can't just say no, and I don't want to communicate this through. It's almost as if, like, they don't even have the capacity to stand by their own decision because they worry that, you know, they might change their mind due to the influence of feelings, right? You know, I've had times where I'm negotiating things. Let's just say, like, recently, for instance, and this is an anecdote that doesn't go into much privacy, I had a situation where I was engaging with a personal trainer who I didn't think was great. I didn't think the culture of the gym was particularly good. And I knew that the gym probably wouldn't want to lose me because I was paying a particularly good membership, and so I had to speak with, you know, the team there. I was of the mind that I was like, I don't really want to continue working here. I don't want to continue training here. I'd rather leave. Then they came back with an alternative offer and said, well, what about this? And I thought, look, given, you know, where I'm at, I'm open to the idea of trying it and then just seeing how this goes. And it ended up actually working out better for me. At the time, I was of the mindset that I'm like, I need to get the fuck out of here. But after making my, you know, my case heard and also talking it through, the trainer that I'm with now, so much fucking better. And I actually enjoy going to that gym because I'm not engaging in the same elements that I was before. The thing that I find really annoying about avoidant attachers is they don't allow themselves to be influenced by the other person and to actually hash this out. It's almost as if they're worried that their emotions are going to betray them and that they're going to suddenly be influenced by the forces of other people. And they basically make out like, you know, you're going to change my mind and manipulate me. I've even heard some avoidants go as far as to say, don't try and change my mind. And I'm going to be brutally honest. They're kind of pathetic. If you don't have command over your own thoughts and feelings, which I know not everyone does, I get it. It's like we don't all have command over our thoughts and feelings. Let me change that verbiage. If you don't think that you can at least be influenced by another person's thoughts and feelings and actually have some decent boundaries around it, you've got problems. It's not your partner. It's not their fault. It's you. You need to learn how to self-regulate and not feel like you can't even say no. And I think that this really speaks to the emotional immaturity of a lot of these individuals. So I thought it was a fabulous point that was raised by this author, and I wanted to share it because I'm sure a lot of you have definitely felt the same way in a lot of these cases. So, let's see. So, in a lot of cases, the avoidants can continue to hold on to the idea even after realizing or knowing it's not true, simply because they're not interested in the truth and the fantasy serves their needs better. For example, the fantasy makes them feel more needed and that makes them feel better about themselves. In these cases, it can be highly likely for the avoidant to become abusive in nature. Okay, so what the author's referring to here is basically stating that the avoidant may try to hold on to the script in their head about what's going on. And actually, if any of you listened to Miranda's letter reading earlier in the week, where Miranda, 7 years ago, dated a fearful avoidant who I think was called Alan, and basically Alan had told her, yeah, I see you like a sister or a family member, and I don't really see you anything more than that. And basically, that was it. They dropped off, right? 7 years pass after that, and after reconnecting, he confesses, I thought you were the one that got away, and I just told you, what I wanted you to hear, so that way I could get rid of you because I wanted you to, I wanted you to hate me. I thought I was doing you a favor, right? That was what he said. And then when Miranda was trying to challenge Alan on this fantasy, being like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, where did this come from? He started going back to the fantasy, being like, oh yeah, but it wouldn't have worked out between us anyways because of long distance, culture, compatibility, and so on. there's more to it, and you should check that live out because it was really, the letter was phenomenal. But the point that I'm trying to draw here is that, you know, even when these individuals know, when they know that they are not necessarily, oh yeah, I think the guy's name was Paul, thank you for reminding me. Actually, no, I think Paul was another guy. I'm pretty confident Paul was another, no, I reckon Paul was another guy. Anyways, the point is, even when these individuals may know that they're full of shit, they will still hang on to the shit. I can't believe it was, yeah, it's Andy. I can't believe I referred to them as Alan, sorry. It's an A-lettered name with 4 letters. I was close. All right. You guys are remembering better than me. Anyways. So yeah, it's interesting how these individuals may refuse to let go of this stuff. All right, it's okay. A lot of the episodes have similar people, even if they're from different backgrounds. So it's okay. And I mean, you got to remember too, like, I changed the names for a lot of these people as well too, just to protect privacy. All right. The refusal to communicate based on the belief that the recipient possesses excessive needs which can never be met. Okay, this is one of the points that I've been dying to get up to because when I read it, I was like, mind blown. So, the premise for this point is that avoidance may have this belief that you are needy, you are too much, you are too demanding, and you can't take care of yourself, right? So, the author goes on to say, individuals going through conflict situations can commonly seek information or explanations to help them achieve clarity, understanding, or resolution. While it is usually possible for the other party to provide these honestly and with minimum fuss, avoidant abusers can go to great lengths to refuse to do so. To support their refusal, they can create excuses in their head based on the idea that the recipient, you, possess excessive needs which will never be met. They can claim that giving the real reasons would have never been satisfied or helped you, or that it makes no difference whether any explanations are given or not, or how matters are conducted makes no difference anyway. These ideas can be promoted by avoidant abusers as it helps them hide their true intentions. So, it's one of those things where, the excuses these individuals come up with just to hide their behavior is wild. And they can make it out like you're some needy person who is just, is incapable of accepting the situation for what it is. The author continues, while there's a huge difference between wanting to get back together and merely wishing to remain on good terms with an ex-partner, avoidant abusers often like to pretend that they do not understand the difference between the two. They fantasize that you want to remain on friendly terms, secretly desiring to rekindle a relationship with them, or that the recipient cannot bear to live life without them, and can make the abuser feel more desirable than they may be in reality. These self-delusions of desirability can make the avoidant feel greatly needed and irresistible, and this is an illusion which they can publicly promote. So, I think what the author doesn't mention here too is that a lot of avoidant behavior can also feed into that. Meaning, because you've often been emotionally starved in these relationships, you've often gotten to a place where you probably are still thirsty for them and thirsty for external validation and love. So, it's understandable that in many ways, you are behaving as a consequence of their actions. So, as such, it's one of those things where their limited communication skills, their confrontation, often causes them to then do this to you where, you probably are looking to get back with them. So, it's pretty fucked up. Let's see. And I think also it feeds into itself. It goes back to that point I was saying earlier about how, when we're looking at a lot of those Get Your Ex Back coaches, that wasn't directed at you guys. It is one of those things where they really do prey on people who are victims of avoidant abuse, because those individuals have been made to feel like, they're still wanting to try and make it work with their avoidant partner, and it's really, 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 really bad. So, it's really bad that this vicious cycle is created by these people who then make out like you're helpless and needy when they created that in someone. Okay, it's also essential to understand that in the context of avoidant abuse, this kind of subliminal communication is usually a lie in itself. On the contrary, avoidant abusers generally take great pains and can put in a lot of effort to conceal the importance of their target to them, and to convince themselves and others that they simply do not care. Yet the contradiction becomes apparent in the fact that to conduct an abuse campaign, especially over long periods of time, requires tremendous energy and focus, meticulous planning and detailed execution with deliberate and purposeful intent. This in itself proves the significance of the target to the abuser. If the target were not quite so important to them, the abuser would be unlikely to find the energy to put in such concerted effort to sustain a long-term campaign, which one can require the abuser, in the words of one, to remain in a mental state of borderline or beyond obsession with their target, sometimes for years or decades, carrying out their revenge or punishment. Now again, this language here is very laced with like cluster B sort of stuff going on, right? But, sorry, I shouldn't say cluster B, let's just say malicious. It's very malicious sort of language and very, meticulous stuff. But what I will take from this, which I think is really significant and interesting for everyone to take away from my 2 cents, is this author is right. For all the avoidant attacher's efforts to appear like, I've moved on, I'm with my new partner, I don't care about you, why the fuck are they hanging around your socials, right? Why the hell are they still, engaging, with memories of you and still thinking about you? It's like when they go to meet someone new and they're talking all about their exes. If we even go back to the episode I did with Miranda's letter, why the fuck was this guy who seemingly said he didn't feel anything for Miranda claiming 7 years later that he thought you were the one that got away and that he loved you? These individuals, they don't move on. As I said in a story recently, they are obsessed with their exes. And so even though that avoidance side, is the self-sabotage that gets in the way of that, I want to make it very clear that these people do not, really get over their exes until they're in therapy and working on it. And much of the time, they're still haunted by their past mistakes. And you see that when they're haunting you on social media through your stories, and they clearly haven't moved on like they said they have. So it can be really, really bad. All right, we got another one. Silencing the victim makes it easier for the abuser to enact further abuse. Avoidant abuse is invisible abuse, and it is easy to harm others when their suffering is not visible. When people can see and hear the suffering they cause, an empathetic sense of guilt and distress can serve as self-restrainers. Studies show that individuals are less likely to continue an attack as their victim's pain becomes more evident. Yet even a keen sense of personal responsibility for the effects of one's actions can fail to restrain harmful conduct when people do not actually see the harm they inflict on their victims. That's often why I think a lot of avoidant attachers who are checked by their friends may minimize their behavior from time to time. But, in this space, if no one's calling them out on it, of course they can get away with it. And there can be a thrill to getting away with bad behavior for a lot of people. So, it can be interesting. Here's another point. When an avoidant comes across someone who is secure in themselves and difficult to manipulate, avoidant abusers can feel slighted by them and even respond with anger at not getting the expected response they are after in order to feel validated. They can, over time, slowly erode the self-worth of a healthy individual in order to elicit their desired response and feel needed. And I think this is something that really speaks to a lot of people who probably identify with a secure attachment, where there was a letter I read about, I think like 2 days ago, where this avoidant partner had been seeing the letter writer for 4 dates, right? And the letter writer, I think her name was Penelope, she got sick between dates 4 and 5. And the fearful avoidant in that example had not liked the fact that she was apparently sick, and he even said, hey, for future dates, I don't want to pay as much. And she was like, yeah, that's fine. And there was an observation made by a follower who said, I bet you anything that fearful avoidant he wanted. Sorry, I know saying that fearful avoidance sounds a bit dehumanizing. It's not meant to be. But for the sake of just getting this message across, we're just using that term for now. The individual who identifies with a fearful avoidant attachment, they went on to say, I bet you anything that what they wanted from Penelope was to say, oh yeah, we'll do whatever you want, they wanted basically, that fearful avoidant attachment wanted a very specific answer, and they weren't actually ready for boundaries. And a lot of the time, fearful avoidance, when they don't feel like they can get their way and they don't feel like a person is fitting in this narrow band of what is acceptable in dating, they'll cut you off. Because, it feels as though, it's too much effort, it's too much struggle at times, so that can be a thing that happens. Once again, just as a reminder, I am talking about those that are more on the severe end of the spectrum. Not all fearful avoidants do this, but it can happen a lot. This was a good one. Abusers can gain approval by creating the appearance of a new successful relationship. This point was so good. This can make it easier for them to bury their heads in a new relationship and pretend like they never did anything wrong, because this is a new opportunity for them to be better. This way, they can escape any feelings of guilt and avoid any attempts at making amends, instead switching to a new person or relationship to focus on feeling virtuous and compassionate. This helps them avoid facing any pending issues related to their target, while continuing to emotionally and psychologically torture them via avoidance tactics. Operating in denial, they can shun any contact with the target, as it can be a reminder of their wrongdoing. Someone here has asked, what about when they're avoidant combined with ADHD? It doesn't really mean much to me, to be completely honest. Listen, I'm not a neurodivergence expert. But in my experience, people with avoidant attachment, it doesn't matter if you have a neurodivergence alongside that as well too, both can absolutely coexist. But I want to make it clear that in my experience, having ADHD, autism, does not usually contribute to these issues. They might be additional factors, but as far as I'm aware at this particular point in time, and I will change this if any new information comes to light, I do not believe ADHD to be the basis for this sort of behavior. There might be a few things going on there too, like the hyperfocusing, the rejection dysphoria, and amongst other things as well too. Again, I'm not a ADHD expert. Someone here asked, do a lot of avoidants also have ROCD? Well, rejection obsessive compulsive disorder is pretty much fear of intimacy. And I would argue that most insecure attachers have an understanding of what that fear of intimacy is. Avoidant attachers know it quite well because it's a conscious fear of intimacy, fear of closeness, fear of vulnerability. But anxious attachers also have a subconscious fear of intimacy. A conversation for another time. Let's see. Let's move on to the next point. We're getting near the end, guys. And then once that's done, I'm going to speed through the questions because I want food and I'm hungry. Right, let's continue with the next one. When they're creating a picture of themselves, maintaining mystery increases the appeal of the unknown. It can encourage the observer to imagine and attempt to decipher what lies behind the mask. This mystery can promise vague possibilities that can be intriguing and fascinating to an outsider. Mysteriousness can make the abuser seem larger than life, and this obscurity can be used to generate much interest and many attempts by others to break through their barrier. This is particularly true of dating apps. I'm sure many of you might have noticed that avoidant attachers on dating apps can have, very vague, bland, profiles, or they can claim in therapy, looking for a connected partner. They have very strong impression management game, but when you get to know them, the substance does not often match the presentation, or the substance was never there from the beginning. And so there can be a lot of restraining themselves from really showing who they really are without actually being very authentic in their presentation. So you see that a lot on dating apps. Abusers tend to surround themselves with those whom they secretly consider to be their inferiors in some respect, whether that be socially, intellectually, financially, or even physically. This is the most effective way for them to sustain fantasies of personal greatness and supremacy in their own world. For the abuser, these inferiors are all minor elements of the audience whose job is to reflect any fantasies the abuser wishes. I think this is something, this particular terminology is definitely used for the more Machiavellian crowd, but we know that a lot of avoidant attachers often don't have a social network that calls them out for their behavior. So there is a tendency for a lot of them to definitely engage in, having a crowd of 1,000 friends on Facebook who they know they have a very shallow connection with these people. And, they definitely don't often have a lot of deep connections with these individuals. Let's see. What else have we got here? I think we're nearing the end. The approval from others is important to them. We have seen how avoidant abusers commit acts of malevolence by knowingly deluding themselves to believe they're doing something beneficial. And this delusion can prevent them from feeling remorse about any abuse they've committed. They can tell themselves, I didn't want to hurt their feelings, so I left them by not saying a word and never spoke to them again. And this way, they can attack or get their revenge and still end up feeling like a good person. I'm paraphrasing, they said kind person, but, we know that it goes back to that shame wound. So, it's true that for a lot of avoidant attachers, they often will, say, oh, I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't mean to do damage to you. I don't understand why this breakup hurt you this particular way. And the danger of this rationalizing is, as I've said many times, the pathway to hell is paved with good intentions. They often think that if I have good intentions, well, it absolves the pain I committed to someone. No. We need to be thinking about the impact of our actions, not just thinking about whether or not we were doing something intentionally, good or bad. So, yeah, that is something we see a lot. I'm going to pluck maybe one more, and then I'm going to try and get through Q&A because I believe I've got 19 plus questions that I need to work through. Actually, there is a good one here. Okay, I'm glad I took notes because this book is so good. By the way, I hope you guys, as you've been listening to this, if you've really enjoyed this book, feel free to please go and purchase a copy. I don't have an affiliate link with this because the author, again, has chosen to remain anonymous. I can't find them on LinkedIn or anywhere else, it doesn't matter. But this book has been really good, so if you're keen on checking it out, please check out the book Avoidant Abuse by Ria Khan. I will make notes of it in the caption of this live when I go to put it out later. I'll put it in the chat now. It's called Avoidant Abuse by Ria Khan. Just as a reminder, the author, I do not have confirmation, is a clinician. They write like one. I don't have any, I can't see their credentials, but I like the way they write. I am, someone who's, able to talk about this stuff. So I can absolutely, use some of this language and talk about it. If you look up avoidant abuse, as this person has kindly linked for everyone, you can find it. It's an ebook. You can't get it on Amazon. You'll have to download it, which is a bit of a bummer. But I like the language of it, and I found it really good. So a lot of you may find it really helpful. All right, next one. For example, in the case of relinquishment, as we've seen, when someone gives them the freedom to... Oh, okay, so just for context, this author is making a point that the example here is when an avoidant breaks up with you abruptly and you consent to it being like, okay, you can go and we don't have to be friends. In the case of relinquishment, when someone gives the avoidant the freedom to exit the relationship peacefully, they lose the power card. As they can no longer remain needed by you out of fear, they have to face being wanted out of the other's freedom of choice, which is a very scary prospect when the abuser is left in a position of vulnerability. When not needed by someone addicted to them, the abuser has to engage with an individual who is not dependent on them, who, as a result, cannot offer what the abuser wants, and who will not operate within their abusive framework. So this can make that person the target of the abuser's hatred and hostility. This is very true, and I've seen a lot of avoidants go ballistic when they've offered you the friendship card and you've turned it down and you've been like, no, I'm going to date whoever I want to date, and they lose their shit. And that also is true if they've said, yeah, we can, go on and date someone else and we can do our own thing, and they see you moving on after they broke up with you, that can cause them to spiral and sometimes to reach back out because they want to get back with you. So that can definitely happen. So yes, that is absolutely a thing. I can see someone here's had what looks like an epiphany because it seems like this relates for them. So yes, this absolutely can be a thing. As someone here also said in relation to the letter reading from the other day, Andy did that to Miranda when she walked away. He got mad at her. Absolutely he did. So, okay, last point. Oops, sorry, maybe not. Maybe last two. Let me just see what that last one was before I go to what I think is the last one. Let's see. Maybe this is it. Yeah, as mentioned previously, it is not necessary for an individual who enacts avoidant abuse strategies to possess a disorder. It can be possible, for example, for an avoidance strategy to be conducted by an individual as an isolated act without any abusive intent. It is also possible for avoidant behavior to stem from poor functioning related to attachment insecurities. And it may be possible in these cases for the tendencies to be addressed and worked on and not necessarily develop into abusive behavior. Avoidant tendencies or even the avoidant personality disorder, do not necessarily result in the enactment of avoidant abuse. I completely agree. I think that is 100% true, and I think it's worth mentioning as well, because like I said before, not every avoidant person is the same. Not everyone will necessarily conduct this kind of behavior, but it's worth re-mentioning just to say, not every avoidant is an abuser. But if they're not working on this stuff and they're aware of the fact that they have this attachment style and they conduct this behavior, then yes, it's very abusive. Okay, so finally, this is the last one. Attributing narcissism or psychopathy to being the cause of almost all cases of abuse can be inaccurate and misleading. It is better to focus on the abuse behavior itself rather than mistakenly pathologizing or misdiagnosing the abuser. In this light, focusing on and terming the abuse rather than the abuser can be a better approach. The terms inverted narcissism, malignant narcissism, or covert narcissism in particular can be associated with avoidant and covert abuse behaviors, making the term avoidant abuse a well-suited term for the various types of covert abuse which are based on avoidance strategies. Yes, I completely agree. So, thank you everyone for joining my book club on that part. I now have 21 questions that I need to get through. And then I'm getting food. But I want to just round out this section here, and thank you all for joining, to say that I think when it comes to recognizing what you've been through, right? Understanding what you've been through, I hate using pathologies. I really do not enjoy being like, this is a narcissist or this is a covert narcissist. Sometimes it's freaking obvious and I'm like, yes, in this individual case, I can spot there is a degree of what I think is covert narcissism, malignant narcissism, whatever's appropriate. And I don't want you guys to stop yourselves from using that language. If it helps your case, fan-fucking-tastic. It's got to feel, consistent for you. But I see a lot of people who I do believe, and I say this out of respect, may not have the same level of exposure, education, and experience as I do, who jump the gun and go, is it this or that? And it's like, guys, just focus on the bad behavior, how it makes you feel, because at the end of the day, if you connect with how this behavior makes you feel, these labels largely don't really make much of a difference. Sometimes, I think in the first stage of recovery, this language is so profound, so cathartic, you're like, thank fuck I have language to describe this. But I think the danger of trying to understand the pathology of the person is it can be very hard to understand what that actually may be. But if you can understand the behavior, it does often at times provide a much more coherent narrative for what's going on. And you can be like, well, actually, I don't really need to know what that person's diagnosis is. I just think I need to move the fuck on if it's appropriate. But again, let me make this disclaimer clear. I am not gatekeeping anyone from using pathologizing terms to describe their case. You're very welcome to do that. More power to you. That's wonderful. But it is one of those things where I just say, be careful with how you use this language if it's not really true in your case. We don't want you guys gaslighting yourselves in the other ways, making out that this person's something that they're not. So, anyways, let's round out here and move on to Q&A. Guys, I'm going to stick to the 22 questions because that's a lot. Love them, but I do have other things I need to take care of today. And I appreciate I talked for a long time, so it's not you, it's me. All right, let's get into this. I'm going to unplug my battery now and get back to talking to you guys from over here. That way I've got the fan on me. Okay, let's do this. Do they secretly respect you more for going no contact because you aren't bugging them or wishing you chase them? I feel like no contact gives control back to us and they can't stand that. Yeah, I agree. I find that in my experience, a lot of avoidants who see you go no contact can be very rattled by that and very bothered. So in my experience, I'd say if you go no contact with an avoidant, usually they're not, even if they tell themselves, good on you, you do the right thing, you have to remember that these individuals often go on to regret their decisions later down the line. So you blocking them might give them a fear of, oh shit, I've lost them. And so it can freak them out. All right, next one. I asked my dismissive avoidant ex for no contact for a while to heal after they blindsided me. He said he'd respect my space, but door to friendship is always open. Do you think he'll never reach out even if he wants to, thinking he's being the good guy by respecting my space? Well, he might reach out again. It'll depend on how he's feeling, and I think it really depends on the rationalizing he does to, acknowledge himself off the back of it too. I didn't hear from my DA for 6 months after he told me his body count was 100 and we can't be compatible because he can't change his past and I'm too good for him. Thoughts? Well, one, he sounds like a sex addict, and two, it sounds to me like he has a lot of internalized shame because he's already telling you, right, that you're too good for him and he can't change his past. So he's already victimizing himself and thinks that he can't change. And I think he's choosing to get rid of you because he's so scared you'll judge him and get rid of him because he doesn't think he's good enough. I know you probably would never have done that in the first place. That's true. True self-sabotage talk right there. So that's on him. My severe, fearful avoidant ex acted like he couldn't care less when I texted him to say, I moved on and I don't want to hear from them now. He is stalking my socials all day, every day, especially when he is not with the rebound. I'm so confused. Why is he doing this if he doesn't care anymore? Because he does care. That's the thing. This is a guy who's trying to act like he doesn't give a shit. But when I say he cares, please do not think that he wants to, try and make a proper relationship with you work. He likes distance, and he's trying to act like very cold and cavalier about this. But the thing is, he hasn't dealt with his emotions. If I don't care about my exes, this is me speaking, maybe not everyone here, I don't fucking watch them on their stories. If there's lingering emotion for me, for someone else, oh yeah, I may browse their socials out of curiosity. These individuals are very good at denying their own emotional stuff and also trying to create narratives as to why they're doing things. I don't care about you, but I'm also stalking your socials. Yeah, well, that sounds to me like, an act of contradiction, doesn't it? All right, next one. Why was it that my dismissive avoidance situationship is able to date all these women, but when it came to me, he said, I never had anyone dig so deep into me and I don't know how to express my feelings for you, only for him to boomerang back every 4 to 6 months for 3 years. Well, the previous relationships he had may have been different from yours in that there may have been a lack of depth in those previous relationships, and he's even admitted that you've been quite curious with him. So it seems to me like when I hear that, my brain goes, they're uncomfortable, but they also really, I think they yearn for that connection with you too, which is partly why they keep coming back. It's almost like this guy's thirsty for love, but then when he gets too close, he backs the hell away, misses you, and returns. It's too close, creates distance because it feels safe, and then he comes back. So, to me, when I hear that, my brain goes, yeah, this is for his benefit, not for yours. I know it's confusing, guys, but when you get it, you get it. Blah, blah. What's next? Why do you think individuals with avoidant tendencies often act in ways that seem careless or dismissive, yet place a high value on maintaining a positive or admirable image on themselves to others? That's a fabulous question. I think there's a few reasons for this. One, they have big shame wounds about being a bad person, so they'll do anything to avoid criticism and contempt from others, so they'll often impression manage to get external validation. They will also... What was the question again? Sorry, I just want to go back to it. It's Friday for me. My brain's like switched off. Why do I think they're careless or dismissive? Because they're often so preoccupied with their own internal state. Avoidant attachers, unlike the rest of us, those of us that are more anxiously attached, for instance, we're often too busy focusing on what does the other person think of us. They're too busy focusing on what am I thinking about myself and everything that's going on internally. They often describe, avoidant attachers often will say, I feel like I'm juggling 9 plates all at once, and to think about another person would be just too much. Like, they're often so preoccupied with their own internal BS. I shouldn't say BS because a lot of it is trauma-based and it's their own stuff. But it's a lot of noise that they're feeling. So that's why they're often looking for these distractions to shut down their brain. They don't have the capacity to think about another person's problems. They're preoccupied by their own problems. So that's why they can be very selfish and dismissive in a lot of cases. That being said, I have met a lot of very sensitive avoidant attachers. Fearful avoidance in particular, they can be hyper empathic to a degree sometimes where they take on other people's stuff way too much and they need to learn boundaries and be like, you need to seriously stop doting on people who are not healthy for you. But, it's really a case of like, what are these people preoccupied with? I think it was Heidi Priebe who said, if I could relabel the attachment styles, I'd actually flip anxious and avoidant. Because the avoidant is often far more anxious than we even realize, and the anxious attacher is avoidant with themselves. And I'm like, yeah, it's actually kind of true. So, that's a way of putting it. All right, next question. My fearful avoidant ex recently told me he didn't think I was his person because if I were, he wouldn't be able to give me space and he would miss me when he goes away on trips, etc. Is this realistic or being part of FA? I'm doing the space to your partner, not to you. Like, come on. Like, seriously? Like, that's a joke. Like, to me, when I hear that, I'm like, bruh, or sis, or person, whoever you may be, really? Like, whenever I hear someone saying something like, oh, we can't be with you because I'd need space and then I'd miss you, so we can't be together. That's called being in a relationship. Like, what? Like, do you need your brain checked? Like, that's what it's about. Like, what's so bad about missing your partner from time to time? Like, oh my God. The horror of having a bit of distance from your partner. So no, like when I hear that, my brain goes, that is absolutely a rationalization. I can't tell if it's I'm probably going to say it does sound more fearful avoidant to me than, dismissive avoidant. But to me, it's just like, what? Like, it's whack, is what I'm going to say. Some of these, some of these rationalizations, I swear. I stepped back from a dismissive avoidant for him to gain clarity. When he didn't know what he wanted and if he gained clarity to let me start that again. I stepped back from a dismissive avoidant for him to gain clarity. For when he didn't know what he wanted and if he gained clarity to reach out. Is it appropriate to check in after some time? It's been 5 weeks, or should I let it be? He said there was for sure a click between us, but described it as confronting. So I'm assuming that in your situation, there's been a agreed upon pause in your situationship or relationship, and he wants space to sort of get clarity on where he stands with you, and you've agreed to that. And now you're wondering if 5 weeks is enough time to assess the situation. Okay, I can't give you advice because I can't do that. But what I can tell you is that in my experience, he is manipulating the situation to benefit his, fear of intimacy. In my experience, when an avoidant attacher gets to the stage of wanting to create distance between you two and to question whether they want to continue the relationship, it is very easy for a lot of people to fawn and to go, yeah, take all the time you need. This is not something that needs 5 weeks of deliberation to discuss. This is something for them where they clearly, were not comfortable with the relationship, and now they're trying to find ways to back out. I guarantee if you try and confront this guy for, a future conversation about how to actually work on this, they will probably say, I'm not ready, or they'll give you a date and then not show up on the date for the thing. If they don't do any of these things, they're a unicorn. They're amazing. Love it. But I highly doubt that, because in my experience, a lot of these people, this is what we're going to say is part of the slow fade. So you're very much going from phase 2, withdraw, to phase 3, detach right now. That's my assessment of it. So if it were me going through this situation, if I was in a point where I am feeling uncomfortable with this particular situation and I want change, here's what I'd say. I'd be like, listen, I respect that you want more time to think about this, but this relationship matters to me as well too. I'd like to have a date to talk about this as, later at the end of the week, because if I can't get that, it does make me feel like I'm waiting on you to have this relationship sorted out when this should be a team effort, and it feels like I'm putting in way more effort to make this work than you are, and that's not fair. I care about you and this relationship, and this doesn't feel fair to me. Please, I'd love to invite you to join me in working on this. I know it sounds a little bit ultimatum-y, but frankly, we've reached that stage. So, that's where I'd say that's what I would do in that situation. But yeah, tough one. Why do they repress their emotion, build resentment, and then blow up in anger? They go into hiding and do silent treatment for weeks. So it's normal for a lot of particularly dismissive avoidance to do what's called appeasing. It's a form of people pleasing. Basically what they do is, as the book was also describing, appease. They say yes when they want to say no, and they just basically, get to a point where they feel like, I don't have any choice, this person's controlling me, and they build up all these narratives and stories about how this person is essentially manipulating them when they're not. And the danger of this is that, they've appeased, they build resentment because they're pissed, and then they go off and, blow up in a big rage like Mount Vesuvius on unsuspecting Pompeii, and then retreat back into the mountain, and, the survivors are left like, what the fuck just happened? And what do we call this phenomenon? As for the silent treatment, I think a lot of that is learned behavior, and I think that a lot of them do that when they don't know how to confront their own emotions and stuff, and they try and build a narrative of, you did this to me, I am the victim, you should have known me better. So I think a lot of it can be done, from that angle, or sometimes it can be done from a place of, I am so shit scared of communicating myself right now and I don't have the skill set for it. That's maybe more stonewalling. Like, stonewalling isn't always done with manipulation in mind. It's done more from a place of like, I fucking don't know how to communicate myself right now and I'm so scared of saying anything because it's going to set someone off. But the silent treatment, that's usually a very passive aggressive technique for sure, where someone's wanting to assert themselves in a very cold, calculated way against someone. So yeah, not fun. All right, I'm going to do a few more and then I'm going to go, because I want food. Right, what do we got here? What is your take when they finally realize and apologize for their abuse and disrespect towards you? Is it okay to help them, Is it okay to help them to recognize how... I can't understand the last sentence. I'm going to assume you mean, what's my take when they realize and apologize for their abuse and disrespect towards you? If they recognize what they've done, I'd say that's fine. Like, I've got nothing wrong with that. Like, my attitude is like, no, good for them. If they're aware enough to realize they've done something wrong, good for them. The danger, however, is that the problem may not be fixed, meaning that the fear of intimacy may still be there, And often when they reach back out, often they're looking for you to, to forgive them because they don't know how to forgive themselves. So that's my take on that. I met in person with a dismissive avoidant ex, and now he ghosted me for about 2 months. Why would he persist to meet and ghost? Because you went for round 2. You probably had a moment where he was excited to see you, had a phantom ex moment, and he was like, oh my God, I want to see you, I miss you. And then when he got close, because he hadn't resolved that fear of intimacy, he's out. That's classic what happens when you go through another cycle of this, when they boomerang. 2 years together, and I assume he's a fearful avoidant. He broke up with me over the phone while I was in Hawaii with my mum for vacation. Wonderful. Anyway, he never offered friendship, but friends with other exes. What does that mean? In my experience, if they're not offering the friendship card, it may be because they know they can't get away with it with you. Or it could be a case that they're afraid for you to say no. It depends on a whole variety of factors. It doesn't mean they didn't think you were great. It just might have actually been the complete opposite, where they're like, shit, I feel kind of intimidated asking this person for friends. I've noticed some self-professed healed avoidants fail to understand the impact their actions had on others. Are they actually healed, or is this common for healed avoidance? Yeah, it's common for quote-unquote healed avoidance. You often see a lot of healed insecure attachers on attachment pages, which includes mine, bleating about their understanding of being healed. Now, let me make that very clear. I did not mean that in a pejorative way against you lot. I love the audience that comes here because I think all of you guys are fabulous in terms of, what you bring to the table. Yes, I'm sure that there are some people in the audience who, may, as with every audience you would get for any influencer, there's going to be some, lovely people and some people who I wish were more lovely. But in terms of attachment circles and healing circles and spiritual circles, I'm confident I would absolutely see, even in my space, there'd be plenty of people who say they're working on their stuff, but really aren't. And there's a big difference between, someone who is really getting to the core of who they are and how they feel versus someone who's still emotionally engaging with the material. There's actually quite an infamous user who lurks on Heidi Preeb's, not Heidi Preeb, what's her name? Who's the attachment queen again? God, I've forgotten her name. Damn. Anyway, there's an infamous clique of people with insecure attachment that go around on YouTube videos who basically share very strong opinions, which on one hand sound like they're self-aware, but really just illustrate the point that you're making, which is they're almost justifying their bad behavior. So short answer is these people haven't healed. Thais Gibson, thank you. Thais has got a bunch of people who go around, they're not connected to Thais, I should say. This group of people often comment on Thais's page about how, for example, if someone ghosted me, I consider it a relief because clearly they weren't for me. When I was in a bad situation with an abrupt breakup, I didn't allow myself to turn into a puddle. I moved on because allowing oneself to be traumatized off a breakup, that's irresponsible to yourself. Times are hard. You just have to move forward with your life because that's just the reality of how life is. Things just get hard and you have to move on. That's basically the rhetoric that I'm referring to. It's that idea of promoting, in this case, avoidance as healing when it's no, I'm going to say something terrible, but I'm not going to say it. You're basically promoting dysfunctional behavior. So that's quite common, unfortunately, for what I would describe as unhealed behavior. And I've seen other people do it too. I've seen, someone say, I think it's unsexy for me to have to ask my partner for their wants and needs or for me to share mine. They should just know how I feel. If I have to do that, they're clearly too weak for me. Just all I'm going to say is that that's just not how I like to approach relationships, but to each their own. All right, let's continue. Going to do a few more. My exes asked her, are you going to push him away? How often do friends hold avoidance accountable? It depends on the friends. Some yes, some no. Is it common for them to erase your relationship if it was never real or valid? That, my friend, is what we call banishment. And absolutely they do. I'm surprised I didn't even get that out of the book, because it's actually from that book, Avoidant Abuse. Yes, banishment is the term we use to describe where the avoidant attacher will do almost everything to get rid of you, to act like you never even existed, as a way of making it seem like, you know, you were never in a relationship, they never cared, because it's their way of avoiding guilt and shame, right? That is absolutely one of, as Dr. Sarah Hensley says, the behaviors in the avoidant playbook. So that can happen for dismissives and also fearfuls. So yes, that is very common, unfortunately, and fucking painful. I will talk more about banishment later because it's such a great term. How do we feel about lying by admission and half-truths? How do we feel about it? I felt like those were meant to keep around till the person decided to push me away with his decisions. It felt purposeful. Oh, I see. Oh, so you're asking me how do I feel about lying, omissions, and half-truths because they kept you around till you were eventually discarded. Well, generally, I don't think lying, omissions, and half-truths, you know, in relationships do a lot of good stuff for anyone. So generally speaking, I'd say it's pretty shitty behavior. But generally speaking, when you ask, like, you know, hey, was it to keep you around? I mean, maybe a little bit. So, yeah, I mean, I'd say it's definitely abusive behavior. Unfortunately, it can also just be, you know, done for self-protective reasons, which are not great. But, yeah, it happens a lot, unfortunately. Right, I'm going to do a couple more, then I'm out. Will they hold your things hostage as a means of control or excuse to reach out in the future? Yes. I tried getting things back through a mutual friend, but X insisted on reaching out by himself and used that as an opportunity to say he'd love to talk. So I ignored. Yeah, this happens a lot. I've heard of people who've lost their house keys, teddy bears, knickknacks, objects to avoidance who haven't wanted to give them back. And a lot of it is because, one, they're still holding on to your stuff, like stalking your socials, because they care about you. Two, they want to control the dynamic because they don't want to let it go. Three, even when it seems like they've let go of this stuff, they haven't. So yes, it's all of that and more. Why did my ex call me mean when I said I wouldn't ask him to help me anymore now that we're done? That is called projection. It really sounds to me like in this particular instance, you know, this person, you know, didn't like the fact that you were setting a boundary and you were being reasonable. He probably expected you to be like, oh, I'd love to reach out, let's do this in the future, and you didn't say that, so of course he's like, you know, that's not okay. I see someone here said, wouldn't holding objects hostage be more fearful avoidant territory than DA? Yeah, I mean, in my experience, I've definitely noticed that more with dismissive leaning fearful avoidance, so you could be onto something there. But it's also, you know, I've noticed a lot of other avoidance fearfuls included to just ship everything back to you in untidy boxes. So it can happen. It can happen regardless. You can get both. But yeah, all right, everybody, I'm gonna round out here. Your boy's hungry. Just gonna finish off again by doing a little bit of marketing, saying thank you for joining today's book club of reading out Avoidant Abuse by Ria Khan. If you are someone separate to this who has just gone through an abrupt breakup with an avoidant attacher, I would love if you could participate in the new course that was created, Blindsided, to break through the first steps to healing from an avoidant breakup, because it would really, really help me out. You can purchase that on my stories because the link's there. It's 150 Australian dollars. The price will go up eventually. But basically, the intention behind this is to help those of you who are in the first stages of your breakup with an avoidant. And It's really designed to also help me get feedback to make something even, greater down the line as well too. So it will help, but it's also designed to be iterative as well too. So really keen to get your feedback. As I understand it, we're trying to get 30 people enrolled. I think I've got 5 who've enrolled so far. So if I can get another 25 in, that'd be magical. So again, you can access that. It's available from the US. Yes, it is. It's available worldwide, so you can definitely access it there too. Ideally, you'd be someone who's just gone through, you've just come off the back of the first stage of a breakup. If you're someone who's like miles away and you're like, fuck you to my ex, you're probably not my audience for this. But you're welcome to check it out if you want. That's totally fine. And yeah, that'd really help me out, as I'm hoping it will help you out as well too. So yeah, you can get that on my stories. All right, thank you everybody. It was wonderful connecting with you all for this reading. And the book Avoidant Abuse by Ria Khan, I'll basically just put that in the caption. And I hope that you all have a wonderful day wherever you may be.